And so when we talk about impact measurement and sustainable development, we talk about, a lot of people don't know this, but it's the theory of change, isn't it? That you've been talking about as well, the input, output, outcome, impact. Exactly. So a lot of companies are at the input level. They're measuring how much are they investing, what are they doing, what policies do they have, etc. And actually, what we need to be looking at is what's the output of that. But then once you track the output, what's the outcome of doing those activities, right? And those outcomes then have an impact. They can have a positive or a negative impact.
And right? Indeed, and look, if you're honest about it, I mean, you know, when we talk about something like climate change and we talk about, you know, the commitments that many companies are making to net zero, the reason why there are still some differences between what a company commits to do for itself and then, you know, in so-called scope 1, scope 2 emissions, which is again a very technical term for what you do in your value chain upstream and in your factories and so on, is because when you start addressing things like the product through the life cycle of how you decarbonize a product, quite quickly you're taken immediately to how the product is used, because a very large piece of that equation is in the way that the person who purchases it uses it. In that, you know, do they take a, you know, do they use it, do they overdose? If you're putting it in a dishwasher, you putting in 2 tabs when you should put in 1. Are you using the eco button or not using the eco button? All of those things have a bearing on the amount of embedded carbon that you are looking to measure. And then, of course, you have the end of life and what happens to it at the end of life. And often so much of that is determined by the choices that the person who bought it makes. If, you know, am I going to recycle that or not? Am I going to reuse it or not? What am I doing towards changing my behavior? So a lot of it actually gets quite difficult, because now you say, well, there's an output, yes, but the impact is variable because it depends on the behavior of the individuals that use it to determine what that is. Now, if you then want to have credible data and data systems that you can stand behind and say, well, that is the overall impact, it's hard to do. So everybody is trying to navigate that at the moment. We're trying to come up with the ways to both model that and ways in which we can measure it. But at the fundamental starting point of it is, you have to rethink what it means to market a product, because within that, historically, it was a very linear construct where the company sold the product or transferred the product to the customer. It could be a retail customer, and that sort of all the responsibilities kind of stopped there. But now, of course, if you're seeing it through that much, through that life cycle and through that extended value chain, what you now have to think about is how you engage and how you start to influence both awareness, because if no one's aware of what matters, they won't take any action.
Correct.
To encouraging people to care enough to want to take action, because to be honest, it's not immediately clear that if you just are made aware of something, that automatically means you're going to take an act and do something differently. No, you have to actually create a sense of engagement and ownership. So people have to feel like this is something that matters to them.
Exactly.
Then they take an action. But then the question that's even the bigger challenge is that action has to become systematic. It has to become constant and consistent. You can't just see somebody doing it for once or twice and then reverting back to their previous behaviors because we make it too difficult, or it just becomes too, because they sort of disengage. So somehow figuring that all out, that's what we're talking about. So when you say you're having a conversation about scope 3, or you're having a conversation about decarbonization through the life cycle, at the heart of it is that. And therefore, where and how you measure impact when you start to take it down the line, all the way down to that end of line, that's the hard thing that we're getting to grips with. And there's no simple solution right now, which is why, we're taking a view that we have that ambition to be net zero, net zero by 2040 right now, because we think it's going to take us a while. And by the way, you have to re-innovate your entire business model to be able to deliver against that. So this all, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it, and it doesn't mean we don't need to accelerate it. It just means that when you look at, how you build the systems that support that, and then clearly how are you going to measure this in a way that is truly robust and accurate, that's the other piece of the jigsaw that we're still figuring out.
Yeah, and I think that's where people's brain starts to go.
Right,
I need like a PhD.
Tough, right? Like, oh my gosh, can we do this? Well,
like seriously, and that's what's freaking people out, right? And I think that's really where we, as the founder of this platform, I really wanted to try and talk about simple because we're using technology to do a lot of this stuff to standardize and streamline the reporting, but simple because we talk about the acronym strategic, interconnected, meaningful, purpose-driven, long-term, educative, do what counts, do what matters, measure what's, important, because it's really hard. It is really, really hard. But I think back to the SDGs, there's actually a natural inbuilt theory of change in the SDGs. So if you imagine that your input layer is your product, your service, your operations, your policies, and your human capital. If you think about at the survey level, like for example, an SDG survey that we've created, that's capturing your output level, how much, when, the real output sort of activities. And then you've got that mapped to the SDG target level, which is the outcomes we want to see. And the targets are mapped to the goal level, which is the impact we want to see. Actually, so it gives you a strategy tool to say, actually, if we do these things, we are going to affect these outcomes. And we are then going to affect these impacts of 17 goals.
Completely. And by the way, this can be really inspirational for people who are working in companies and with brands, in our case. This is the thing that can actually make a huge difference to motivating and accelerating change, is that people can see it because it feels tangible. And, so what we're doing is, in our case, we're looking at every one of our major brands, our major global brands, each tying their purpose, their brand purpose, and aligning that to an SDG. And to a series of SDG outcomes, because sometimes it's more than one.
Yes.
And trying to see what when they start to look at then the impact that they want to have, they link it back to those bigger societal impacts. And what we're saying at the corporate level, which is what if you look at our sustainability ambitions, if you look at what we think is the biggest disruptive impact that we can have, it's the cumulative and collective impact of all of those brands together.
That's right.
Yeah. Taking what they do and driving that. And so in some ways, just making those products available is in a way driving positive societal impact. And so, this is actually kind of core to then our growth ambitions. Because it's the driver of our business growth as much as it is of the societal impact that we want to have.
That's awesome. And actually, as you said, we talked about the interconnectedness of the SDGs. It's actually your collective brands could be targeting certain SDGs and targets, but they're all interconnected. So if you pull on one lever, you indirectly and directly connect to other SDGs at the same time. And so that's the power of something that is social, economic, and environmental all working together, because they do have different, one lever pulls another lever and increases that indirect and direct impact. So which is also powerful, rather than a checklist that you're working towards. Actually, you really want to make sure what you're doing gives you as much bang for your buck as possible.